The greatest secrets are rarely hidden behind locked doors. Sometimes, they walk out of the castle every evening carrying nothing more than a loaf of bread. No one in Blackstone Castle questioned Grace Walker anymore. At 26 years old, she had become part of the castle itself. Every morning before sunrise, she polished marble corridors until they reflected the stained glass windows above. She prepared guest chambers, carried fresh linens, served breakfast in silence, and disappeared whenever noble conversations began. To the lords and ladies, she was simply another maid dressed in a modest brown gown with a faded linen apron. Reliable, quiet, forgettable. Grace preferred it that way. She never lingered after her duties ended. She never joined the other servants for supper. She never accepted invitations to festivals inside the castle courtyard. And every single evening, just as the golden light of sunset touched the highest tower, she removed her apron, collected a small basket wrapped in cloth, and hurried through the western gate. Always alone, always in a hurry. The servants had created dozens of stories over the years. Some believed she secretly cared for an elderly grandmother. Others whispered she was meeting a forbidden lover beyond the forest. A few insisted she was hiding stolen treasures somewhere in the hills. Grace smiled politely whenever she overheard the rumors. She never corrected anyone, because the truth belonged to someone far more important than herself. High above the courtyard, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood stood on the balcony outside his private study. From there, he could see nearly every servant crossing the castle grounds. For months, one small detail had quietly refused to leave his thoughts. Grace always left at exactly the same time. Not 5 minutes earlier. Not 5 minutes later. No matter the weather. No matter how busy the castle became. Even during royal banquets, she completed impossible amounts of work simply to leave before sunset. It was unusual. Ethan wasn't a man who ignored unusual things. Years of protecting the kingdom had taught him that dangerous secrets often hid inside ordinary routines. His trusted beta, Lucas Grant, noticed the king's gaze drifting toward the western gate once again. The maid. Ethan answered without looking away. She has never stayed past sunset. Lucas chuckled. Perhaps she has someone waiting. Servants are allowed private lives. They are. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. But routines reveal character. And hers never changes. Lucas shrugged dismissively. I hardly think a castle maid deserves your majesty's attention. Ethan finally looked at him. I wasn't asking whether she deserved it. Silence settled between them. Far below, Grace crossed the courtyard carrying her small wicker basket. One of the younger kitchen boys hurried after her. You forgot your supper. Grace smiled warmly as she accepted the wrapped loaf of bread. Thank you. And don't forget to eat something yourself. The boy laughed. You always worry about everyone else. She gently ruffled his hair before continuing toward the gate. Ethan noticed something else. Instead of taking the shortest road into the village, Grace disappeared into the old forest trail leading away from every nearby home. No one lived that direction anymore. The villages beyond the woods had been abandoned years earlier after harsh winters drove most families away. So why was she going there? The question lingered long after she vanished between the towering pines. That evening, while nobles celebrated another successful council meeting inside the Great Hall, Ethan found himself staring absent-mindedly at his untouched meal. Grace's quiet routine refused to leave his mind. Not because he distrusted her, because instinct whispered that someone willing to guard the same secret every single day for years was protecting something far more valuable than anyone inside the castle realized. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the mountains, Ethan quietly set down his silver goblet. Tomorrow, he decided, there would be no royal escort, no crown, no armor bearing the Blackwood crest. For the first time in many years, the Alpha King would leave his castle alone. Not to hunt, not to inspect the borders, but to follow one quiet maid home, completely unaware that before another sunset arrived, he would come face to face with the greatest surprise of his entire life. Curiosity has led many kings into battle. But on this evening, it led one king into a forest where destiny had been waiting for years. The following day unfolded exactly as every other day inside Blackstone Castle. Grace polished the grand staircase before sunrise. She prepared the Queen Mother's sitting room. She delivered fresh towels to the royal guest chambers. She quietly served afternoon tea during the council meeting without once lifting her eyes toward the nobles discussing matters of war and trade. No one noticed her, except Ethan Blackwood. From across the great hall, he found himself watching the castle clock more often than the council itself. As the final rays of sunlight stretched across the stone floor, Grace removed her linen apron, thanked the kitchen staff, accepted a small bundle of bread and dried meat, then slipped through the western gate exactly as she always did. This time, she wasn't alone. Several hundred feet behind her, dressed in the plain leather clothing of a traveling hunter, Ethan quietly followed. No royal cloak, no crown, no guards. Only a simple bow rested across his shoulder, making him appear like any ordinary woodsman returning home before nightfall. Grace never looked back. Her footsteps followed the narrow forest trail with remarkable confidence. She clearly knew every stone, every fallen tree, every winding turn beneath the towering pines. Ethan remained far enough away that even his enhanced alpha senses would not betray his presence. The deeper they traveled, the quieter the forest became. Birdsong slowly disappeared. Only the gentle rustling of leaves accompanied Grace's steady pace. After nearly 40 minutes, she left the main path altogether. Instead, she followed a barely visible trail hidden beneath wildflowers and thick ferns. Ethan frowned. Very few people knew this route existed. Then he saw it. A small wooden cottage stood in a peaceful clearing beside a crystal stream. Smoke curled gently from the stone chimney. Bright flowers surrounded the tiny porch. Freshly chopped firewood rested neatly beside the door. Someone lived here. Grace hurried forward. Before she even reached the steps, the front door burst open. A small boy, no older than 5, ran outside laughing. "Mom!" Grace dropped the basket instantly and knelt with open arms. The little boy threw himself against her, wrapping both arms tightly around her neck. "I missed you." She kissed the top of his blonde hair. "I missed you too. Were you good today?" The boy nodded proudly. "I finished my reading. And I helped Mrs. Harper feed the chickens." Grace smiled with unmistakable pride. "I knew you would." Hidden behind the trees, Ethan stood completely still. Something about the child felt strangely familiar. It wasn't merely the blonde hair. Many children shared that. It wasn't even the bright blue eyes. Then the boy laughed. A deep dimple appeared in his left cheek. Ethan unconsciously touched his own face. He carried the very same dimple. The little boy looked up at Grace again. "Did you bring bread?" She laughed. "Of course. And apple jam. I even brought your favorite." The child cheered happily before taking the basket inside. Grace remained outside for a moment, watching him with quiet affection. The expression on her face was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen inside the castle. There, she was simply a hard-working maid. Here, she was a mother whose entire world fit inside a tiny wooden cottage. Ethan should have turned back. He had already learned enough. Grace's secret was harmless. She had simply been protecting her child. Yet something inside him refused to leave. Not suspicion, not fear. Something far more difficult to explain. As the cottage door remained open, the little boy suddenly ran back outside carrying a carved wooden sword almost as long as his arm. "Watch this, Mom." He planted his feet, raised the tiny sword, and performed a sequence of practice movements with astonishing precision. Ethan's heartbeat slowed. Every stance, every turn, every defensive movement. They were identical to the Blackwood royal sword forms taught only to members of the Alpha King's bloodline. No village child should have known them. No ordinary family could have learned them. Grace froze for the briefest moment before gently lowering the toy sword. "Not outside, sweetheart." The boy looked disappointed. "But you said Father used to practice like this." Ethan felt the world around him become impossibly quiet. "Father." The word echoed through the forest. Grace's eyes filled with emotions she quickly tried to hide. She knelt beside the child and softly brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "One day, when the time is right, I'll tell you everything." Hidden among the ancient pines, Ethan Blackwood stared silently at the little boy whose smile, eyes, and fighting stance reflected pieces of himself he never knew existed. For the first time in his life, the Alpha King realized he was no longer following a mystery. The mystery had just looked directly into his own soul. The truth rarely announces itself all at once. It reveals itself one impossible detail at a time. Ethan Blackwood remained hidden among the ancient pines long after darkness settled over the forest. The cottage glowed softly beneath the evening sky. Warm candlelight flickered through its small windows. From where he stood, he could hear laughter drifting into the quiet woods. It was a sound he had not heard in years. Not inside Blackstone Castle. Not during royal banquets. Not even among victorious soldiers returning from battle. It was the simple laughter of a child who felt completely safe. Against his better judgment, Ethan stepped closer. The open window allowed him to see inside. Grace placed fresh bread onto the small wooden table while Noah carefully arranged 3 bowls. There, the little boy smiled proudly. Our table is ready. Grace laughed gently. We're only 2 people. Noah tilted his head. I always set 3. Just in case. A shadow crossed Grace's face. She forced another smile before kissing his forehead. Maybe someday. Ethan felt an unexpected heaviness settle inside his chest. The child had never met his father. Yet every evening, he still prepared a place for him. Grace carried a steaming pot of vegetable stew to the table. Before they began eating, Noah quietly folded his tiny hands. Can we pray? Grace nodded. The little boy closed his eyes. Thank you for today's food. Thank you for Mom. And he hesitated. If my father is somewhere far away, please help him come home someday. Grace's eyes instantly filled with tears. She turned her face slightly so Noah wouldn't notice. Outside, Ethan could barely breathe. The innocent prayer echoed through the silent forest with far greater force than any battlefield cry he had ever heard. When supper ended, Noah disappeared into the next room. Grace slowly opened an old wooden chest beneath the fireplace. From it, she carefully removed a faded blue blanket embroidered with the silver wolf crest of House Blackwood. Ethan's heartbeat stopped. Only members of the royal family possessed blankets bearing that crest. Grace gently brushed away the dust. I promised I'd keep it safe. She whispered so softly that only Ethan's alpha hearing could catch the words. I've kept every promise. She folded the blanket with extraordinary care before placing it back inside the chest. Moments later, Noah returned carrying a small leather pouch. Can I wear it tonight? Grace smiled. Only until bedtime. The boy proudly hung a silver pendant around his neck. Moonlight reflected from its polished surface. Ethan instinctively stepped closer. The pendant displayed the ancient Blackwood family crest engraved on one side. On the reverse, a tiny crescent moon surrounded by 3 stars. His family had used that exact symbol for generations to identify direct heirs. The pendant had disappeared 6 years earlier. No search had ever recovered it. Grace had it. Noah wore it. Ethan's mind raced through impossible memories. 6 years ago, during negotiations with neighboring pacts, his royal escort had been ambushed inside Raven Pass. Chaos, fire, arrows, smoke. He remembered falling from his horse after shielding several soldiers. He remembered losing consciousness. And then, nothing. When he finally awoke days later inside the royal fortress, the healers insisted no civilians had survived the attack. The missing pendant had simply been forgotten amid greater losses. Or so he had believed. Inside the cottage, Noah suddenly climbed onto Grace's lap. Mom, yes. When I finally meet my father, will he like me? Grace wrapped both arms around him. He'll love you. How do you know? Because. She gently touched the silver pendant resting against his chest. You're the best part of him. Outside, Ethan closed his eyes. Every answer seemed to create a dozen new questions. If Noah truly carried the blood of House Blackwood, why had Grace hidden him? Why had no one informed the castle? And why had every official report insisted no witnesses survived Raven Pass? Before Ethan could gather his thoughts, another sound reached his ears. A twig snapped. Not behind him. To his left. Someone else was hiding in the forest. Instinct instantly replaced emotion. Ethan quietly slipped behind a thick oak tree and focused his heightened senses. A dark figure wearing a hood watched the cottage from the opposite side of the clearing. The stranger wasn't observing with curiosity. He was studying the house with the cold patience of someone waiting for the perfect opportunity. Then, beneath the moonlight, Ethan caught the brief metallic glimmer of a drawn dagger. In that single heartbeat, the mystery surrounding Grace and Noah became far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Someone else knew they were here, and whoever it was, had not come to watch. A true alpha can sense danger before he sees it. But sometimes, Protecting a family means remaining invisible for just one heartbeat longer. Ethan never took his eyes off the hooded stranger. The man crouched behind a cluster of thick evergreens at the edge of the clearing, his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't a hunter. He wasn't a traveler. Hunters watched the woods. This man watched the cottage. His grip tightened around the dagger resting against his thigh. Ethan lowered his breathing until it became almost imperceptible. Years of warfare had taught him patience. Charging forward without understanding the enemy's intentions could place Grace and Noah in even greater danger. The stranger waited. 1 minute. Then another. Inside the cottage, Noah's laughter gradually faded. A candle was extinguished. Another remained glowing beside the fireplace. Grace was preparing her son for bed. The hooded man finally moved. He slipped silently through the trees, never stepping on dry branches, never disturbing loose stones. Professional. Every movement confirmed Ethan's suspicion. This wasn't a desperate thief. This was someone trained. As the stranger approached the back of the cottage, Ethan circled through the shadows, cutting off his path without revealing himself. Only 20 feet separated them now. The assassin reached into his cloak. Instead of another weapon, he removed a small glass vial. Moonlight reflected against the pale liquid inside. Poison. He intended to contaminate the water barrel standing beside the cottage. No noisy attack. No struggle. Only sickness that would leave almost no questions behind. The assassin removed the cork. Before a single drop could fall, Ethan struck. One powerful hand clamped over the man's wrist. The other seized his throat. The vial slipped from trembling fingers and shattered harmlessly against the ground. The assassin's eyes widened in terror. He hadn't heard anyone approach. Ethan forced him backward into the darkness beyond the clearing before either Grace or Noah could hear the struggle. Steel flashed. The assassin drew a concealed knife with his free hand. Ethan twisted his wrist sharply. The blade fell into the leaves. A single punch ended the fight. The man collapsed to one knee, gasping for air. Ethan pulled back the hood. The face was unfamiliar. Scarred. Middle-aged. Professional. Not a common criminal. Who sent you? Silence. Ethan pressed the fallen dagger lightly against the man's neck. I'll ask once. The assassin smiled through bloodied lips. You already know too much. He suddenly bit down hard. A hidden poison capsule shattered between his teeth. Foam appeared almost instantly. Within seconds, the man's breathing stopped. Ethan cursed quietly. Another dead end. He searched the body with practiced efficiency. No identification. No family crest. No coins. Nothing. Only a single black ring engraved with the image of a serpent surrounding a crown. Ethan's expression hardened. He had seen that symbol once before. Years ago, on documents recovered after the Raven Pass massacre. Those responsible had supposedly been eliminated. Apparently, someone had survived. Before Ethan could study the ring further, movement inside the cottage caught his attention. Grace opened the back door carrying a wooden bucket. She froze. The broken glass glittered beneath the moonlight. The water barrel stood untouched, but fresh footprints surrounded it. Grace slowly looked toward the forest. For one terrifying second, Ethan believed she had spotted him. Instead, her expression shifted into quiet concern. She whispered almost to herself, "They found us again." Again. The word struck Ethan harder than the assassin's blade ever could. This wasn't the first attempt. Grace hadn't been hiding because she feared judgment. She had been hiding because someone had been hunting her child for years. Grace quickly emptied the damaged water, scrubbed the barrel clean, and carried Noah's wooden practice sword inside before locking every window. Her calm movements revealed painful experience. She had performed these precautions before, many times. From his place among the trees, Ethan finally understood the weight she had carried alone. Every day, she worked tirelessly inside Blackstone Castle. Every evening, she hurried home, not because she wished to keep secrets from the kingdom, but because every sunset meant another night protecting a little boy who didn't even know someone wanted him dead. Ethan closed his hand around the serpent ring. His decision was made. At sunrise, he would return to the castle, not to expose Grace. Not yet. First, he would uncover who had buried the truth about Raven Pass. Because whoever had erased the past was now trying to erase its last living witness. The most dangerous lie is not the one that is spoken. It is the one that has been carefully preserved for years. Before sunrise, Ethan Blackwood returned to Blackstone Castle. His horse crossed the drawbridge while the morning mist still covered the valley, but the king's thoughts remained inside the small cottage hidden deep within the forest. Grace, Noah, the assassin, the serpent ring. None of it fit the story he had been told 6 years ago. Inside his private study, Ethan locked the heavy oak doors himself. Only one person received permission to enter. Lucas. His beta stepped inside moments later. "You sent for me, Your Majesty?" Ethan placed the black serpent ring onto the desk. Lucas's confident expression disappeared. "Where did you find this?" "So you recognize it?" Lucas hesitated. "It belonged to the organization responsible for the Raven Pass attack. I believe they were destroyed." "So did I." Ethan watched him carefully. "Someone tried to poison a woman and her child last night." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "Who?" "I haven't decided whether to answer that question." Silence filled the room. For the first time in years, Ethan studied his oldest advisor without assumptions. Lucas had served beside him through countless battles. He had earned absolute trust. But trust was no substitute for truth. "I want every surviving report from Raven Pass. They were archived years ago." "Then retrieve them." Lucas bowed. "As you command." The moment the beta disappeared down the corridor, Ethan summoned the castle archivist instead. An elderly scholar named Edwin arrived carrying 3 dust-covered ledgers. "These are all the official investigations, Your Majesty." Ethan spent hours reading every page. Casualties, military losses, destroyed supply wagons, recovered weapons, witness statements. Everything appeared complete. Almost. One page had been carefully removed from the final report. Not torn, precisely cut away. Someone had deliberately erased part of the record. Who maintained these archives? Edwin adjusted his spectacles. Lord Chancellor Victor Ashford supervised all military reports after Raven Pass. Ethan's expression darkened. Victor Ashford, one of the kingdom's most respected nobles. The very man responsible for organizing post-war investigations. Later that afternoon, Ethan attended the Royal Council as if nothing had changed. Grace entered quietly with a silver tray of tea. As always, no one acknowledged her. She poured tea for every noble before reaching Ethan. For the briefest moment, their eyes met. Grace immediately lowered her gaze. Respectful, professional, completely unaware that the king now knew about the little boy waiting for her beyond the forest. Ethan noticed something else. Grace's hands. Tiny scars crossed several of her fingers. Old scars, not kitchen burns. Knife wounds. The kind earned by someone who had defended herself more than once. She quietly stepped away. Lord Chancellor Victor Ashford continued presenting tax reports without interruption. "The Northern Territories remained stable, Your Majesty." Ethan barely listened. Instead, he watched Victor's reactions. Nothing. No nervousness. No hesitation. Either the Chancellor knew nothing, or he had mastered the art of hiding everything. After the meeting ended, Ethan walked toward the training yard. Noah's wooden sword techniques replayed endlessly in his mind. Only one other person had ever practiced those exact forms outside the royal family. General Rowan Hale, the commander who had trained Ethan since childhood. The old warrior now lived in quiet retirement beyond the eastern cliffs. By sunset, Ethan was standing inside Rowan's modest home. The retired general listened without interrupting as Ethan demonstrated the child's sword sequence. When Ethan finished, Rowan slowly stood. Without speaking, he performed the identical movements. Perfectly. Then he looked directly into Ethan's eyes. "I taught those forms to exactly 2 people. You and..." His weathered face became unusually serious. "A young woman who saved your life after Raven Pass." Ethan's heartbeat stopped. "A woman?" Rowan nodded. "She carried you through burning wagons after the ambush. She refused every reward. She vanished before you regained consciousness." Ethan felt the room spin. "What was her name?" The old general answered without hesitation. "Grace Walker." Every piece of the broken puzzle shifted into place. Grace hadn't appeared in his life by chance. She had been there on the most important day he could barely remember. She had saved the Alpha King. She had disappeared. She had raised his son alone. And somehow, the entire kingdom had been convinced she never existed. As Ethan rode back toward Blackstone Castle beneath the rising moon, one truth became impossible to ignore. The conspiracy surrounding Raven Pass had never ended. It had simply waited 6 years for the last surviving witness to be found. And now that Ethan had begun asking questions, the people responsible would soon realize that their king was hunting them instead. Every conspiracy has one fatal weakness. Sooner or later, someone grows too confident to remain hidden. For the next 3 days, Ethan Blackwood behaved exactly as he always had. He attended council meetings. He inspected the royal guard. He judged disputes between neighboring villages. To the kingdom, nothing had changed. But behind the walls of Blackstone Castle, a silent investigation had already begun. Only 3 people knew: Ethan, General Rowan Hale, and the elderly archivist, Edwin. Together, they compared forgotten military reports with old supply records, messenger logs, and burial registries from 6 years earlier. The inconsistencies multiplied. A convoy officially listed as destroyed had actually returned to the capital. 3 witnesses recorded as deceased later appeared on tax records under different villages. Most disturbing of all, the names of the soldiers assigned to protect Ethan during the Raven Pass ambush had quietly disappeared from every surviving document. Someone hadn't merely hidden the truth. Someone had rewritten history. Late that evening, Rowan arrived carrying an old leather journal. I finally found it. Ethan opened the worn pages carefully. It was Rowan's personal field diary. Unlike the official reports, these entries had never passed through royal archives. One page immediately caught Ethan's attention. The young woman refused to abandon His Majesty despite overwhelming danger. She carried him into the forest while enemy scouts searched the valley. She identified herself only as Grace Walker before disappearing with the child she claimed to be protecting. Ethan looked up instantly. The child? Rowan nodded slowly. I always assumed she meant another survivor. Silence settled between them. Not anymore. Everything pointed toward the impossible truth. Noah had already been with Grace during Raven Pass. Yet the dates made no sense. The boy was only 5 years old. Raven Pass had happened 6 years earlier. Unless... Ethan closed the journal. Grace had already been pregnant. Noah had survived the massacre before he had even been born. A quiet knock interrupted their thoughts. Lucas entered without waiting for permission. I found something. He placed several sealed letters across the desk. These were intercepted by our border patrol this morning. Ethan broke the first seal. Inside was a simple sentence. The boy has been located. His expression hardened. The second letter read, wait for confirmation before retrieval. The third contained only one instruction. The king must remain unaware. Every letter bore the same black serpent symbol. Rowan reached for his sword. They know. Ethan nodded. They know someone has started asking questions. Lucas pointed toward the final page. It was carried by a messenger traveling toward Blackstone. Did he survive questioning? He escaped. How? Lucas hesitated. He had help. The room became silent. Help from inside the kingdom. Perhaps even inside the castle. At that exact moment, a castle servant rushed into the study, pale with fear. Your Majesty, what is it? The western village. Ethan stood immediately. What happened? The cottage belonging to Grace Walker. His heart skipped. It's burning. Without another word, Ethan was already moving. Within seconds, he mounted his horse. Rowan and Lucas followed with a dozen royal guards. The night air cut across Ethan's face as they raced through the forest. Every mile felt endless. By the time they reached the clearing, flames had already consumed half the roof. Neighbors desperately formed a line from the nearby stream, passing buckets toward the fire. Ethan jumped from his horse before it stopped moving. Grace! No answer. He ran toward the collapsing doorway. A frightened villager grabbed his arm. Your Majesty, don't. My son. The words escaped Ethan before he even realized he had spoken them. Everyone froze. Ignoring the stunned faces around him, Ethan tore free and disappeared into the smoke-filled cottage. The heat was suffocating. Burning beams crashed onto the floor. Furniture had already collapsed beneath the flames. Grace. Still nothing. Then, a faint cough echoed from the back room. Ethan forced open the half-burned door. Grace lay on the floor, shielding Noah beneath her own body. A fallen timber blocked their escape. Her shoulder was bleeding. Smoke had nearly stolen her consciousness. When she lifted her head and saw Ethan standing inside the burning room, disbelief replaced exhaustion. Your Majesty. Ethan didn't answer. He lifted the massive beam with both hands, throwing it aside before kneeling beside them. Noah opened his tear-filled eyes. The little boy stared at the stranger who had somehow arrived exactly when they needed him most. For the first time in 6 years, father and son stood face to face without either of them fully understanding that destiny had finally refused to keep them apart. Sometimes, the greatest secret in a kingdom is not hidden behind stone walls. It is hidden inside a child's innocent question. The roof collapsed only moments after Ethan carried Grace and Noah out of the burning cottage. A shower of sparks rose into the night sky. Villagers stepped back in stunned silence. None of them had ever witnessed their alpha king emerging from a blazing house with a maid cradled in one arm and a frightened child clinging to the other. Ethan gently lowered Grace onto a blanket beside the village healer. "See to her injuries." The elderly woman nodded immediately. "Yes, Your Majesty." Grace finally regained enough strength to speak. "You shouldn't have come." Ethan looked directly into her eyes. "I was already too late once." Her expression froze. She understood exactly what he meant. The healer carefully examined Grace's wounded shoulder. "It's only a deep cut, but she's inhaled far too much smoke." As the healer worked, Noah refused to leave Grace's side. He tightly held her hand, refusing every attempt by the villagers to comfort him. Ethan slowly knelt beside the little boy. "You were very brave." Noah wiped away his tears. "I tried to move the beam. I wasn't strong enough." "You protected your mother." Ethan answered quietly. "That takes more strength than most grown men possess." For the first time, Noah truly looked at him. The little boy studied Ethan's face with innocent curiosity. "You look familiar." Grace immediately lowered her eyes. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. Children often notice truths adults ignored. Before either of them could speak again, Noah reached toward the silver pendant still hanging around his neck. "My mom says this belonged to my father." Ethan carefully took the pendant into his hand. His fingers recognized every engraved line, every mark, every scratch. There was no longer any doubt. This had once been his. Grace slowly whispered, "Please." "Not here." Her voice carried neither fear nor shame, only exhaustion. She had spent 6 years protecting a truth she could no longer hide. Ethan gave a small nod. "I understand." Nearby, Lucas approached quietly. The fire wasn't accidental. Ethan stood. "What did you find?" Lucas held out a small leather pouch. "We discovered oil-soaked cloth beneath the western wall. It was prepared before sunset. So the assassin failed, and they chose fire instead." Lucas lowered his voice. "We also found tracks leading toward the northern road. One rider. He left immediately after the flames spread." Ethan looked toward the blackened remains of the cottage. They weren't trying to frighten her. They wanted evidence destroyed. Grace overheard every word. Her face turned pale. There were letters. Ethan immediately faced her. "What letters?" "My journals. I wrote everything I remembered about Raven Pass. They were hidden beneath the floor." She closed her eyes. "They're gone." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Rowan Hale walked out of the smoking ruins carrying something wrapped inside a burned cloak. "I found this." He carefully opened the bundle. Inside lay a partially burned wooden box. The lock had melted, but several folded papers remained untouched beneath the charred lid. Grace gasped. "My journals." She reached for them with trembling hands. Ethan gently stopped her. "Not yet." He carefully unfolded the first surviving page. The handwriting was unmistakably Grace's. "If anyone ever reads this, know that the attack at Raven Pass was ordered from inside the kingdom." Every person standing nearby became completely still. The next sentence struck even harder. "I recognized one of the attackers before the fire separated us." Ethan's breathing slowed. "Who?" Grace swallowed. "I never knew his name. But..." She looked directly at Ethan. "He wore the royal wolf crest." Silence crashed over the clearing. Only members of the king's personal guard wore that symbol. Lucas instinctively placed his hand on his sword. Rowan's face darkened. Someone inside the royal guard had betrayed the Alpha King 6 years ago. Grace continued quietly. "I was afraid no one would believe me. So I ran. I thought hiding Noah was the only way to keep him alive." Ethan finally understood every decision she had made. She had never abandoned the kingdom. She had sacrificed her own life inside it. He looked toward the gathered villagers, then back at Grace. "No more hiding." His voice carried the quiet authority that had led armies through impossible wars. "From this moment forward, you and Noah are under my personal protection." Before anyone could respond, the distant sound of hunting horns echoed through the forest. One, then another, then a third. Rowan's expression immediately hardened. "Those aren't our soldiers." Lucas drew his sword. "They found the village." Ethan stepped in front of Grace and Noah without hesitation. The hunters were no longer searching for forgotten witnesses. Now, they were coming for the Alpha King's family. A father will fight for his kingdom because it is his duty. He will fight for his child because it is his heart. The hunting horns echoed again, closer this time. Every instinct Ethan possessed told him the attackers were no longer searching. They had already found their target. "Rowan," the old general stepped forward. "Take half the guards and secure the eastern tree line." Lucas, the beta, unsheathed his sword. "With me." Villagers hurried to gather the children inside the stone chapel at the center of the settlement. Grace struggled to stand despite the pain in her injured shoulder. "I can help." Ethan gently steadied her. "You've done enough." She met his eyes with quiet determination. "No, I've spent 6 years running. I'm not running tonight." Before Ethan could answer, an arrow struck the burned remains of the cottage behind them. Then another, and another. Masked riders emerged from the darkness between the trees. There were nearly 20 of them. Each wore black leather armor marked with the same silver serpent emblem. Their leader slowly removed his hood. A scar crossed the left side of his face. He smiled coldly. So, the rumors were true. The Alpha King finally found the boy. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between the riders and Grace. "You've already lost." The man laughed. "Not yet." He raised one hand. Several archers immediately aimed toward Noah. Everything happened at once. "Down!" Ethan roared. He lunged backward, wrapping Noah in his arms as arrows filled the night air. Rowan and the royal guards answered instantly. Steel clashed against steel. Villagers fled toward safety. Lucas intercepted 2 attackers before they reached the chapel. The forest exploded into chaos. Grace grabbed Noah's wooden practice sword from the ground. Although it was only carved wood, she held it without hesitation as she shielded Noah beside Ethan. The scarred leader watched her carefully. "I remember you." Grace's face went pale. "You survived Raven Pass." "So did you." He smiled. "That was our greatest mistake." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You were there." "I was." The assassin casually drew a long, curved blade. "We almost killed the king. We should have finished the woman too." Grace's breathing stopped. It was him. One of the men who had hunted her through the burning valley 6 years ago. The assassin pointed directly at Noah. "But the child? He cannot be allowed to live." Without another word, he charged. Ethan met him head-on. Their swords collided with enough force to send sparks into the darkness. The assassin was fast. Far faster than the previous attackers. Every strike carried years of professional training. But Ethan carried something stronger than experience. He carried purpose. Each blow drove the assassin farther away from Grace and Noah. Meanwhile, Rowan and Lucas slowly pushed the remaining attackers toward the forest. One by one, the masked riders fell. The leader suddenly retreated several steps. He realized the battle had already turned against him. "You don't understand, Your Majesty." He laughed breathlessly. This kingdom was never betrayed by soldiers. It was betrayed by noblemen. Ethan attacked again. The assassin barely blocked. "They're still inside your castle. They still wear your colors. And they still believe the heir must die." Those final words froze everyone for a single heartbeat. Even the surviving attackers looked toward Noah. They knew exactly who he was. This had never been about revenge. It had always been about succession. The assassin suddenly threw a smoke bomb onto the ground. Gray smoke swallowed the clearing. When it cleared seconds later, he was gone. Only the bodies of his followers remained behind. Silence slowly returned, broken only by heavy breathing. Grace knelt beside Noah, holding him tightly. The little boy trembled, but remained brave. "Mama, why do they want me?" Grace couldn't answer. Tears quietly filled her eyes. Ethan slowly approached them. He knelt until he was level with Noah. Then, without hesitation, he removed the Blackwood signet ring from his own finger. The ring every Alpha King had worn for generations. He gently closed Noah's small hand around it. "You keep this." The little boy looked confused. "But, it's yours." Grace stared at Ethan in stunned disbelief. "Ethan." He looked at her with complete certainty. "I don't need another investigation. I don't need another report. I already know." His voice remained calm, but every word carried the weight of absolute conviction. No one fights this hard for another man's child. Grace finally lowered her head. 6 years of fear. 6 years of loneliness. 6 years of impossible silence. All of it collapsed in a single quiet whisper. "He's your son." The forest became perfectly still. No dramatic revelation followed. No cheering. No celebration. Only a father looking into the eyes of the child he had unknowingly searched for all his life. Noah looked back with innocent curiosity. He hesitated. "Are you really my father?" Tears formed in Ethan's eyes for the first time since becoming Alpha King. He gently rested one hand against the little boy's cheek. "Yes, and I promise you this. No one will ever make you hide again." The moment a king chooses his family over his fear, every hidden enemy begins to lose. Dawn arrived beneath a sky still stained with smoke from the burned cottage. The surviving attackers had fled. Their dead were buried outside the village walls. But Ethan Blackwood knew the battle in the forest had only been the beginning. The true enemy still sat somewhere inside Blackstone Castle. Grace and Noah traveled beside him in the royal carriage for the first time. Noah sat quietly between Ethan and Grace, holding the Blackwood signet ring with both hands as though it were the most precious treasure in the world. He looked up at Ethan. "Do castles really have hundreds of rooms?" Ethan smiled faintly. "They do." The little boy's eyes widened. "Then, will I get lost?" Grace couldn't help laughing softly. "You probably will." Ethan chuckled for the first time in many years. "If you do, I'll come find you." Noah grinned. "Promise. I promise." The carriage rolled through the massive gates of Blackstone Castle just after sunrise. Word spread through the palace within moments. The Alpha King had returned. With a maid. And a child. Servants stopped working. Guards exchanged confused glances. Nobles whispered behind jeweled sleeves. No one understood why the king personally escorted an ordinary maid into the Great Hall. Lord Chancellor Victor Ashford stepped forward with a polite smile. "Your Majesty, we were not informed of your return." "You are now," Ethan answered calmly. His eyes never left the Chancellor's face. Victor noticed Grace immediately. His smile faded for a fraction of a second. It was almost invisible. Almost. Ethan saw it. So did Rowan. The great hall gradually filled with council members, commanders, judges, and noble families. Lucas quietly ordered the doors sealed. No one would leave until the king allowed it. Confused murmurs spread across the chamber. Ethan slowly walked toward the throne, but did not sit. Instead, he stood beside Grace and Noah. His voice echoed through the silent hall. 6 years ago, I was told that every civilian witness at Raven Pass had died. He paused. That report was false. Dozens of faces changed at once. Some surprised, some frightened, some suddenly very still. Ethan continued. The woman who carried me to safety survived. He looked toward Grace. She stands beside me today. A wave of whispers swept through the nobles. Grace lowered her head, uncomfortable beneath so many eyes. Victor Ashford stepped forward smoothly. Your Majesty, surely there has been some misunderstanding. Before Ethan could answer, Rowan placed Grace's recovered journal onto the council table. Then came the serpent ring, then the burned letters, then the altered military reports. One piece after another. The room fell silent. Victor's confidence slowly disappeared. Ethan's voice became colder. Someone erased witnesses. Someone rewrote official records. Someone sent assassins. And someone ordered the death of a child. No one spoke. Ethan looked directly at Victor. Would you like to explain why every missing document passed through your office? For the first time, the Chancellor had no immediate answer. His silence spoke louder than any confession. Lucas stepped behind him. Lord Victor Ashford, you are under arrest for treason against the crown. Victor suddenly laughed. Not with panic. With certainty. You've already lost. Several nobles abruptly drew hidden daggers. More guards inside the hall removed black serpent rings from beneath their sleeves. The conspiracy had reached deeper than anyone imagined. Chaos erupted. Steel flashed across polished marble floors. Royal guards fought traitorous officers. Rowan protected Grace. Lucas intercepted 2 assassins racing toward Noah. Victor lunged toward the child himself. Everything happened within seconds. Before Ethan could move, Grace stepped forward. Without thinking, without hesitation, she threw herself between Victor and Noah. The dagger meant for the little boy tore through her sleeve, grazing her arm before Ethan struck Victor across the chamber with a single devastating blow. The Chancellor crashed against a stone pillar and collapsed unconscious. The remaining conspirators immediately surrendered. Silence slowly returned. Grace looked down at the fresh cut on her arm, then at Noah. "Are you all right?" The little boy threw both arms around her. "I'm okay. You saved me again." Tears filled Ethan's eyes as he watched the woman who had protected him 6 years earlier do exactly the same thing for their son. Some people never changed. They simply kept choosing courage. Ethan stepped into the center of the great hall. Every noble, every guard, every servant, every citizen present lowered their heads. The Alpha King took Noah gently by the hand. Then he raised the child's small hand high enough for the entire kingdom to see the Blackwood signet ring. His voice carried to every corner of the chamber. "This child is Noah Blackwood. My son. My rightful heir. No one will ever question his place again." Gasps echoed throughout the hall. Ethan then turned toward Grace. She instinctively stepped back, still wearing the simple brown dress of a castle maid. He closed the distance between them, slowly took her hand, and before the entire kingdom, the Alpha King bowed his head, not to a queen, not to a noblewoman, but to the maid who had once carried him through fire, protected their son through 6 years of fear, and never asked for recognition. "You saved my life. You protected our child. You carried the weight that should have been mine." His voice softened. "From this day forward, you will never carry it alone again." Grace could no longer hold back her tears. Noah reached for both of their hands at once. As the morning sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of Blackstone Castle, the invisible maid, the forgotten child, and the Alpha King stood together not because destiny had chosen them, but because love, courage, and truth had finally defeated every lie that had tried to keep a family apart. The hardest battle is never won with a sword. It is won when broken trust learns to breathe again. 3 days passed after the conspirators were arrested. Blackstone Castle had never been quieter. Hidden chambers were searched. Secret ledgers were recovered. More than 40 officials were taken into custody. Every confession revealed another layer of the conspiracy that had poisoned the kingdom for years. Yet inside the royal residence, Ethan found himself facing a challenge no battlefield had ever prepared him for: becoming a father. He stood outside Noah's room just before sunrise. The door remained slightly open. Inside, Noah slept peacefully beneath a thick wool blanket. Grace sat beside the bed, gently brushing the boy's blonde hair away from his face. She looked exhausted. For 6 years, she had never allowed herself to sleep deeply, always afraid someone would come searching for the child. Even now, surrounded by royal guards, that habit had not disappeared. Ethan quietly entered. "You should rest." Grace smiled faintly. "I've been saying the same thing to myself for years." He pulled another chair beside hers. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Only Noah's quiet breathing filled the room. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I'm sorry." Grace slowly turned toward him. "For what?" "For every birthday I missed. For every fever I wasn't there to comfort. For every nightmare he faced without his father." His voice grew quieter. "I cannot recover those years." Grace reached across the small space between them. She gently placed her hand over his. "You didn't choose to leave. You were never given the chance to stay." Those simple words lifted a burden Ethan had carried since learning the truth. Across the room, Noah suddenly stirred. His sleepy eyes slowly opened. He blinked twice before smiling. "You're both still here." Grace laughed softly. "Where else would we be?" The little boy sat upright. "I thought maybe I'd wake up and it was all a dream." Ethan leaned closer. "It wasn't. I'm not going anywhere." Noah hesitated. "Can I ask something?" "Anything." The boy looked down at the ring resting on his finger. "Can I still call Mama?" "Mama." Grace's eyes filled with tears. Ethan smiled warmly. "I would be disappointed if you didn't." Noah relaxed immediately. "Good. Because I don't want anything to change." Ethan looked toward Grace. "Some things shouldn't." Later that morning, the castle gardens slowly filled with sunlight. Noah insisted on exploring every path. Every fountain fascinated him. Every statue inspired another question. Did wolves really guard this castle? Who planted these trees? Can birds recognize kings? Grace laughed each time Ethan patiently answered. The mighty Alpha King who once terrified neighboring rulers now spent half an hour explaining why squirrels buried acorns. Watching from a distance, Rowan folded his arms. I've never seen him like this. Lucas smiled. Neither have I. For the first time in years. The king looked peaceful. As Noah chased butterflies across the garden, Grace quietly approached Ethan. There's something I've never told you. He turned toward her. What is it? The night after Raven Pass. She looked toward Noah. I almost returned. Ethan remained silent. I stood outside the castle gates. I wanted to tell you everything. Her voice trembled. But I saw soldiers searching every traveler. One of them wore the serpent ring. I realized they were waiting for me. So I ran. Ethan closed his eyes. One different decision. One safer road. One honest guard. Their entire lives might have changed. Grace lowered her head. I've wondered every day if I made the right choice. Ethan gently lifted her chin. You kept Noah alive. That was the right choice. Before Grace could answer, Noah came running back toward them. You have to see this. He excitedly pointed toward a wounded white wolf resting beneath an oak tree. Its front leg had been caught in an old hunting trap. The frightened animal growled weakly. Royal guards immediately reached for their weapons. Ethan raised one hand. No. Grace slowly knelt several feet away from the injured wolf. Her movements remained calm, patient, kind. Noah copied her exactly, kneeling beside his mother without fear. The wolf's growling gradually faded. It lowered its head. Then, incredibly, it crawled the final few feet toward Noah. The little boy looked up in amazement. It trusts us. Ethan watched the scene in thoughtful silence. Among wolves, trust was never given lightly. It was earned through courage, through gentleness, through truth. Exactly the qualities Grace had lived by for 6 long years. As Noah carefully stroked the animal's snowy fur, the castle bells suddenly rang across the kingdom. Once, twice, 3 times. Lucas hurried into the garden, his face unusually serious. Your Majesty, the elders have arrived. Ethan's expression immediately changed. The council? Lucas nodded. They've come to determine whether Noah can legally be recognized as heir before the entire kingdom. Grace instinctively reached for Noah's hand. She had survived assassins, conspiracies, and 6 years of hiding. But the greatest judgment of her life was only beginning. The truth can prove who belongs by blood. Only character can prove who deserves the crown. The Grand Council chamber had not gathered in full for nearly 20 years. Representatives from every noble house filled the circular hall. Clan elders, military commanders, judges, scholars, even village leaders had been summoned. Every person present understood the importance of this day. At the center of the chamber stood a single stone platform. Upon it rested the ancient crown stone, a relic said to have witnessed every Alpha King's oath for generations. Noah stared at it curiously. It doesn't look very special. Grace squeezed his hand gently. Sometimes the oldest things never need to be beautiful. Ethan smiled quietly. They only need to be true. High Elder Miriam Ashcroft, the oldest member of the council, slowly approached. Her silver hair reached nearly to her waist. Despite her age, her voice carried throughout the chamber. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood. You request official recognition of Noah Blackwood as your lawful heir. I do. You understand that this judgment cannot be reversed. I understand. She then faced Grace. Grace, you stand before this council not as a servant, but as the mother of the proposed heir. Grace lowered her head respectfully. I understand. The elder nodded. Then let the testimony begin. One by one, witnesses stepped forward. Rowan described the battle at Raven Pass. Lucas presented the recovered journals. The village healer testified about Grace's years of sacrifice. Farmers explained how she had worked through winters while refusing charity. Teachers spoke of Noah's kindness toward other children. Every testimony painted the same picture. Grace had never hidden for selfish reasons. She had hidden to protect her son. Finally, Elder Miriam turned toward Noah. You may approach. The little boy hesitated. Grace knelt beside him. You only have to tell the truth. Noah nodded. He walked onto the stone platform alone. The enormous chamber became completely silent. The elder smiled kindly. Are you afraid? A little. That's perfectly acceptable. She asked gently. If you become crown prince one day, what would you do first? Many adults expected an answer about armies, or castles, or power. Instead, Noah thought carefully. I'd fix the orphan house. Several nobles exchanged puzzled glances. The elder continued. Why? Because children shouldn't wonder if someone will come back for them. The chamber fell silent again. Even hardened generals lowered their eyes. Noah looked toward Ethan. I don't want anyone to wait as long as I did. Grace quietly wiped away tears. Ethan felt his throat tighten. No tutor had taught Noah those words. They came from 6 years of quiet loneliness. Elder Miriam smiled warmly. A wise answer. Another elder stepped forward. Lord Benedict Holloway. Unlike Miriam, his expression remained stern. There remains one concern. He looked directly at Grace. The boy was raised outside royal customs. He has received no noble education, no political training, no military discipline. Several nobles nodded in agreement. Benedict continued. Can such a child truly become Alpha King? Before Ethan could answer, Noah unexpectedly raised his hand. May I say something? The elder blinked. You may. Noah looked around the enormous chamber. I don't know how to be a prince. That's true. I don't know all the rules. I've never lived in a castle. He looked toward Grace. But Mama taught me something. If someone is hungry, you feed them. If someone is scared, you stay beside them. If someone lies, you tell the truth anyway. He finally looked at Ethan. And if you're strong, you protect people who aren't. Silence filled every corner of the chamber. No elaborate speech could have carried greater weight. Ethan realized Noah had unknowingly described everything a true Alpha King should be. High Elder Miriam slowly approached the crown stone. She rested one weathered hand upon its surface. Then she looked toward the council. We have heard blood. We have heard evidence. We have heard truth. Now we have heard character. One after another, the elders rose to their feet. Then the commanders. Then the judges. Finally, every noble inside the chamber stood. No formal vote was spoken. None was necessary. Miriam raised her staff high. By unanimous judgment of the Grand Council, we recognize Noah Blackwood as the lawful heir to the Blackwood throne. The chamber erupted with applause. Grace covered her mouth, overcome with emotion. Noah looked confused. Does that mean? Ethan knelt beside his son. It means the kingdom has finally come home. Before the celebration could continue, the massive chamber doors suddenly burst open. A royal messenger stumbled inside, breathless and covered in dust. He dropped to one knee. Your Majesty, a neighboring kingdom has crossed our northern border. They're marching under the belief that the Blackwood Kingdom has fallen into civil war. Every smile disappeared. The conspiracy inside the kingdom had ended. Now, an even greater test awaited the newly reunited royal family. A kingdom can survive an invading army. It cannot survive a king who forgets why he fights. The Royal War Council assembled before noon. Maps covered the enormous oak table. Northern watchtowers, mountain passes, river crossings. Every route into Blackwood territory had been marked in red ink. General Rowan placed a carved wooden figure near the northern border. The kingdom of Ashimore crossed the Frost Ridge before dawn. They have nearly 4,000 soldiers. Lucas added another marker. Our northern garrison numbers fewer than 1,500. Several commanders exchanged uneasy glances. The odds were impossible. Ethan remained calm. They're testing us. They believe civil war weakened the throne. Rowan nodded. They expect divided leadership. Grace quietly stood near the chamber entrance with Noah. Neither interrupted. Neither wished to. But Noah carefully watched every movement around the map. After several minutes, he tugged gently on Grace's sleeve. Mama. She bent closer. What is it? The Blue River. He pointed toward the map. Why aren't they guarding the bridge behind the forest? Grace frowned. Before she could answer, Ethan noticed them. What do you see, Noah? The little boy hesitated. I don't know. It just looks strange. Every commander looked toward the map. Noah slowly approached. He pointed toward a narrow crossing almost everyone had ignored. When I used to collect firewood, we always crossed streams where the rocks were shallow. If I wanted to surprise someone, I wouldn't use the big bridge. I'd use the small one. Silence filled the chamber. Rowan suddenly leaned over the map. His eyes widened. The Birch Ford. Lucas immediately understood. The scouts never reported it because cavalry usually can't cross there. Rowan looked again. Unless the river level dropped. A messenger rushed forward. It has. Last week's drought lowered the water nearly 2 feet. Every experienced commander suddenly realized the danger. Ashimore wasn't attacking the fortress. They were preparing to surround it. Ethan looked at Noah. The little boy had unknowingly seen what dozens of generals had missed. He smiled proudly. Thank you. Noah blinked. I helped. You just saved thousands of lives. Orders exploded across the chamber. Move the Second Legion. Secure Birch Fort. Double the archers. Send riders immediately. Within minutes, the castle transformed into organized motion. Blackwood soldiers marched north. Supply wagons rolled through the gates. Blacksmiths worked without pause. Throughout the afternoon, Grace helped prepare medical supplies beside the castle healers. She wrapped bandages, sorted herbs, filled water flasks. She had no title beyond the king's protection, yet every healer willingly followed her quiet instructions. One elderly physician smiled. You've done this before. Grace nodded softly. Too many times. As evening approached, Ethan entered the infirmary. He found Grace carefully stitching torn blankets into emergency stretchers. You should rest. She looked up. So should you. He smiled. Kings rarely receive that privilege. She laughed quietly. Neither do mothers. For a moment, the noise around them disappeared. Only the two of them remained. Ethan reached for her hand. I've spent years trying to protect this kingdom. I almost lost the two people who mattered most. Grace squeezed his fingers gently. You found us. That's what matters now. Before Ethan could answer, Noah ran inside carrying the injured white wolf from the garden. The animal now walked with only a slight limp. It followed me. The wolf stopped beside Ethan. Then, astonishing everyone in the infirmary, it lowered its head before Noah. One healer whispered, the old legends. Rowan, standing nearby, quietly nodded. The White Guardian. Grace looked confused. What does that mean? Rowan smiled faintly. For centuries, our stories have spoken of a white wolf that appears only when the Blackwood bloodline stands united. Lucas laughed softly. I always thought it was a bedtime story. The wolf calmly lay beside Noah's feet, perfectly at peace. Noah scratched behind its ears. I think he just likes company. Everyone smiled. Perhaps that was the simpler truth. Sometimes hope needed no prophecy, only a frightened child willing to show kindness. Just before sunset, scouts returned from the north. Their horses were covered in mud. The captain dismounted and saluted. Your Majesty, we reached Birch Fort exactly as ordered. And the enemy's advance force arrived less than an hour later. They walked directly into our ambush. Rowan allowed himself the first satisfied smile of the day. How many? Nearly 800 surrendered. The rest retreated. A wave of relief swept across the command hall. One observation from a 7-year-old boy had changed the course of the campaign before the battle had truly begun. Ethan looked toward Noah, not with pride alone, but with understanding. Leadership was never inherited through blood alone. It was revealed in quiet moments when someone noticed what everyone else overlooked. As the castle celebrated the unexpected victory, another messenger arrived under the cover of darkness. Unlike the others, he wore no royal colors, only a faded traveler's cloak. He knelt before Ethan and placed a sealed letter upon the table. There is one more truth. My king, it concerns the night Prince Noah was born. Grace's heart nearly stopped. Some secrets had survived 6 years. One of them had just returned. Sometimes the greatest inheritance a child receives is not a throne. It is the example of two people who chose love over fear every single day. The letter remained unopened for several long moments. Its wax seal bore the crest of St. Elian's sanctuary. Grace recognized it instantly. Her hands trembled. I know that seal. Ethan looked toward her. You've been there. She nodded slowly. It was the place where Noah was born. The entire room fell silent. Ethan carefully broke the seal and unfolded the faded parchment. The handwriting belonged to Sister Eleanor, the elderly nun who had helped Grace during the darkest night of her life. The letter had been written months earlier. If you are reading this, then perhaps truth has finally found its way home. Grace, you once asked me whether hiding your son from the world made you a coward. It never did. A mother who protects her child is never running away. She is standing between innocence and danger. There is one truth I kept until I believed it was finally safe. The men wearing serpent rings found the sanctuary 2 days after Noah was born. They demanded the child. Someone inside the royal court had informed them where you were. But before they arrived, another visitor came, an old royal guard named Thomas. He never revealed who sent him. He only said one sentence. Tell the mother to keep running. Then he led the assassins away from the sanctuary. He never returned. Please remember his sacrifice. The letter ended with a final line. Some heroes are remembered in songs. Others simply make sure someone else survives. Grace quietly covered her eyes. I always wondered how he escaped. Ethan folded the letter carefully. We'll remember him. We'll honor him. Noah looked between them. He saved me. Ethan nodded. He did. The little boy lowered his head. Then, I want to be like him someday. No one answered immediately. There was nothing to add. His words already carried everything they hoped he would become. Weeks passed. Ashenmore, believing Blackwood stronger than expected, requested peace negotiations instead of continuing the invasion. The northern border remained secure. The conspirators received fair trials. Families separated by the conspiracy were reunited. The orphan house Noah had spoken about before the council was rebuilt with royal support. Grace personally visited every child during the opening ceremony. She recognized the uncertainty in their eyes, because she had once carried the same fear herself. One quiet afternoon, Noah ran through the castle gardens with the white wolf bounding happily beside him. His laughter echoed beneath the ancient oak trees. Grace watched from a stone bench. Ethan quietly joined her. For several minutes, they simply watched their son play. No politics, no enemies, no fear, just peace. Ethan finally spoke. Do you remember the first day we met? Grace smiled. You were unconscious. I wasn't very impressive. You were heavy. He laughed. I suppose that's fair. She leaned gently against his shoulder. For years, I believe my story ended the night I left the castle. Ethan softly intertwined his fingers with hers. No, that was only the chapter where courage carried us. This, he watched Noah laughing beneath the sunlight, is the chapter where we finally get to live. The castle bells rang across the valley, not as warnings, not for war, but in celebration. Citizens gathered beneath the palace balconies. The rebuilt kingdom welcomed its royal family together for the first time. Ethan stepped onto the balcony, holding Grace's hand. Noah stood proudly between them. The crowd erupted into joyful cheers. Yet what happened next surprised everyone. Instead of standing before the people alone, Ethan gently guided Grace forward. Then Noah. The kingdom did not cheer only for its king. It cheered for the woman who had carried hope through 6 impossible years. It cheered for the child who reminded every adult what true leadership looked like. And it cheered for a family that proved crowns are not what make a kingdom strong. Truth does. Kindness does. Courage does. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the mountains, Noah slipped one small hand into Ethan's and the other into Grace's. Together they walked back inside Blackstone Castle. Not as a king, a maid, and a hidden child, but as a husband, a wife, and the heir who had finally come home. And from that day forward, whenever the people of Blackwood told the story of their greatest alpha king, they never began with his victories in battle. They began with the brave young maid who refused to let him die. Because that single act of courage became the reason an entire kingdom found its future again.